You are watching part 3 of the full series of Java Spring Boot interview questions. These are the 5 questions we are going to discuss in this session. Describe the Spring Boot auto-configuration mechanism. What is the purpose of the @component annotation in Spring Boot? Explain the difference between @component, @repository, @service, and @controller annotations in Spring Boot. What is the role of the @autowired annotation in Spring Boot? How can you implement logging in a Spring Boot application? First question, describe the Spring Boot auto-configuration mechanism. The Spring Boot auto-configuration mechanism automatically configures the Spring application based on the dependencies present in the class path. It uses the concept of conditionals to determine which beans and configurations should be enabled or disabled. By analyzing the class path and the available configuration, Spring Boot can provide sensible defaults and reduce the need for explicit configuration. This makes it easier to start and configure a Spring application. Second question, what is the purpose of the @component annotation in Spring Boot? The @component annotation is a core annotation from the Spring framework and is also used in Spring Boot. It is a generic stereotype annotation used to mark a class as a Spring-managed component. Components are auto-detected by Spring and can be used for dependency injection and component scanning. The @component annotation serves as a base annotation for more specific annotations like @repository, @service, and @controller. Third question, explain the difference between @component, @repository, @service, and @controller annotations in Spring Boot. @component, it is a generic stereotype annotation used to mark a class as a Spring-managed component. It is a broad and generic term that can be used for any type of Spring-managed component. @repository, it is a specialized form of @component used to indicate that a class is a repository or data access component. It typically encapsulates database operations and exception translation. @service, it is a specialized form of @component used to indicate that a class is a service component. It encapsulates business logic and is often used as an intermediate layer between controllers and repositories. @controller, it is a specialized form of @component used to indicate that a class is a web controller component. It handles incoming requests, performs business logic, and prepares the response to be sent back to the client. Next question, what is the role of the @autowired annotation in Spring Boot? The @autowired annotation is used for dependency injection in Spring Boot. When applied to a field, setter method, or constructor, it allows Spring to automatically resolve and inject the required dependencies. By using @autowired, developers don't need to manually instantiate and wire dependencies. Spring Boot scans the application context for beans matching the required type and injects them automatically. Next question, how can you implement logging in a Spring Boot application? In a Spring Boot application, logging is typically implemented using a logging framework such as Logback or Log4j2. Spring Boot provides a default logging configuration out of the box. You can configure logging levels, appenders, and log formats using the application.properties or application.yaml file. Additionally, you can include the desired logging framework dependencies in your project's build configuration and use the framework's APIs to perform logging within your application code. Hope you have learned something and feel confident to answer the questions we discussed so far. Here is the list of questions that will be discussed in the next session. Please check out our playlist for more questions and subscribe our channel for updates and notifications. Good luck for your upcoming interviews.